George Bernard Shaw once said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Anybody who has had to deal with any aspect of communications, be they external facing or internal, has certainly come across that moment where you think you got something across and then you find out, no, you did not. In fact, you could say that good communication is more than just a soft skill. That is what my guest today thinks, and we're going to talk about some of the principles of effective communication. I'm speaking with Jennifer Razzano. She is the Director of Internal Communications at 8451. Hi, Jenny.
Hey there, Derek. How are you today?
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here.
And of course, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to this episode of Digital Signage Done Right. Don't forget you can, of course, subscribe and review and share and all that jazz. And you can follow along with a transcript on the physics website, where you will also find helpful links. Whether you're using digital signage or not, our podcast gives you practical tips for communications and content to better engage your audience. I'm Derek DeWitt. Welcome to Digital Signage Done Right. So Jenny, I love this statement, effective communication is more than just a soft skill, because that's usually what it's classified as. Oh, it's a soft skill, and so therefore it's kind of ignored and all this. I'm glad to hear somebody try and, give communications its due.
Yeah, a lot of people feel like it's just a nice to have, not a need to have. But if you think about your weekly average of sorting through emails, chat notifications, meetings, a number of different channels that you communicate in, you probably spend an average of 28 hours doing that. And that really does start to impact the bottom line, especially if it's ineffective communication. There's a financial, productivity, and just general stress and frustration when it comes to internal communications. And there are real dollars and stats attached to that.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things that these tools that we develop that in theory are supposed to save us time end up doing exactly the opposite. They, in fact, create more work for us,
There's a proliferation of channels and different means to reach people, but I think that in effect has made it more difficult to make sure that your message is relevant and it resonates with people. So yeah, more channels doesn't mean better communication. So you got to go back to your core and your foundation of really developing a strong message first.
Let's talk about some of the problems that this, you almost might want to call it a riot of communications options and strategies and channels out there presents. You have some pretty interesting statistics about how many hours a week are wasted and so on and so forth. Tell me about those.
Yeah, 28 hours per week wasted on ineffective communication and emails. That's from Atlassian. So that's pretty staggering when you think, your typical work week is 40/50 hours, depending on your workload.
Right. Like that's more than half my work.
Exactly. So that gives you a pause and, should raise a lot of eyebrows as well and, pain.
Right. And as a company, I think this is not cost effective, because what that means is if I'm paying somebody, I don't know, let's say $80,000 a year to make the math work, I'm paying $45,000 a year to have this person do stuff that actually doesn't do stuff.
Exactly. There's another stat where it is the perspective of employees. They cite ineffective communication as one of the main sources of workplace failures. So that's 86% of employees. And then when you ask execs that same question, that jumps to 95%. So it's a problem.
But aren't they the ones who are like, isn't it kind of their fault?
In some cases, yes.
It'll be interesting, and I'd like to get into that a bit more in just a little while. But it works out to something like $12,000 on average per employee per year is basically lost.
Yeah, due to communication barriers. That's SIS International Research had that stat, and that's staggering. I mean, when you multiply it by X number of employees, and the part that makes it most staggering and frustrating is that it is so easily fixable, and it's not like hitting an easy button. It does take some time and some work to kind of make sure you're approaching things in the right way. But once you get this mindset, you get in a rhythm with it. So it's not that, again, this is not like rocket science, but it, I guess, is more difficult than we realize.
Well, especially as people get older, I think we both know that sometimes it gets harder and harder to get people to sort of change those mindsets. And so then you kind of go, okay, well, look, employees say that bad communication is a big problem. Okay, maybe the bosses don't care. Maybe when you talk about money, okay, now maybe they're paying a little bit more attention. But of course, that's stick stuff. What about carrot stuff? There are positives as well from developing effective communication strategies.
Yeah, for sure. There's a ton of research that speaks to that, and it's like better project outcomes if you improve communication clarity. The overall experience. If people are better informed, 77% are more likely to suggest process improvement. So that speaks to more of an executive level, hopefully ears perking up like, yeah, I want my people to improve things, not just, be robots and do things.
Right. And if they're making suggestions, that means they're engaged.
Exactly. And then Atlassian again reports that teams with effective communication, they're actually getting projects done 28% faster. Again, a great, bottom line number there, I think, that translates to everyone, especially CEOs. And then Harvard Business Review had a stat of 71% of a reduction in error rates when communication is clearly established. So that's phenomenal as well. When you're in companies that have frontline safety, issues or safety protocols, I should say, those numbers can be life or death in some cases. If people aren't following something correctly, from a communication protocol or just protocol in general, there can be serious, unfortunate injury to people. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I'm coming at it, from more of a day-to-day meeting and email perspective. But when you're, in companies again that have frontline associates and manufacturing environments or supply chain, distribution type situations, construction, if something's not clear, it could be a serious injury or worse. So that's just something else to look at too with communication effectiveness.
I've had that thought before that I do think it's funny that you'll see some companies, for example, obviously, let's say it's a warehouse or a manufacturing plant or something. On the floor where people can, lose a finger, yeah, they're real careful. Everything's clear. Nobody has any questions. They're trained. They are backed up. There are checking protocols in place. There are reporting protocols in place for when things either accidentally or through, sloth are missed, things that endanger everybody because that's physical well-being. And then, you go upstairs into the cubicle farm and none of those principles are being used at all. Those people, it's like they might as well just be on a different planet or they work for a different company. I don't understand why you don't you already have the systems, so just transfer them over to the guys wearing ties.
There seems to be some type of lost in translation moment, as you say, when you hit a different floor and there's some type of nuance or not nuance, or, there's just, again, it's lost in translation. And just putting your audience first is a great way to start thinking differently about that. And I think that's where the core of a lot of the problems are. It's more of a me, what do I want? How do I want this to sound? But you have to really flip the script and put your audience first.
Two things I kind of want to circle back to are this idea of 86% and then whatever it was, 90% of managerial level people say, ineffective communication is the main source of failures in the workplace. And then this Harvard Business Review thing that 71% of a reduction in error rates when you have clear protocols established. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. What are those clear protocols? Is it always a case-by-case basis? Are there general principles? And how does one transition an existing system that's maybe ad hoc and sometimes effective and sometimes not, into one that is clear and everybody gets on the same page about?
Yeah, I think that when you said principles, that's really a great place to start. If you take more of a principles approach, I think it's easier to translate into different teams and, different types of communication scenarios. By that, it's really looking at, again, your audience and reader first. So you're swapping places with them. You're having empathy for them, their situations, what they're trying to achieve. And when you start with that framework, it starts to, again, flip the script to enable them to receive information and understand it better versus you just ticking something off your list and getting it out. So there's just a little bit of a mindset change there. And when you do the principles of that, it starts to break open a little more effective communication.
This word empathy is used a lot in these contexts by modern communications people. I don't know if the big dogs actually know what that means in practice. There are actually certain things you can do in order to achieve that. We're not talking about that you're just sitting there at your desk going, yeah, it must be hard for them. Like, like actually, what is it like to be employee A doing their job and then get this communication? What's happening in their head? Does it interrupt their flow? Does it make them freak out? Does it make them question things? Is it clear? Like things like this is what we're talking about when we say empathy.
That's exactly right. I think, it's just always going back to the idiom of, walking a mile in someone else's shoes. So you're really just trying to put yourself into their situation. And that's where I do think it's underestimated in creating effective messaging and communication in general. You do have to sit back and think for a minute. You just can't go and do. That's where I think a lot of these stats come into play. You have to step back and think, what questions might they have? Anticipate needs. What experience am I creating for this team person, whatever your end audience is? Am I making it too hard for them to trying to figure out what I'm trying to say? You just have to really play it back a lot. So if you kind of just, again, swap places with them and focus on their needs, it starts to become a lot more relevant and meaningful. There is also a way to check this with the AI tool of your choice. So you could put in a first draft, just get started. So once you have your crappy first draft, you can take, again, AI tool of your choice, plug it in, just kind of say, what's missing here? What questions might arise from this draft, or what am I missing? And it does really help you, prompts you for like some of those hidden spots too. So there's a way to have a little bit of a writing partner with AI. And I always have to disclaim any AI with writing. It's a partner. It's not a replacement.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of people, at least you would think from some of the media stories out there, though I wonder how many of them are legit. Well, people just putting stuff into AI and then whatever it spits out, they copy and paste it and they go, there you go, there's my job done. And that is absolutely the wrong way to use it. It's more like having an informed discussion with, a group of semi-experts and going, hey, what do you think about this? It's a place to workshop, not to just, copy.
Exactly. It's a good checkpoint too. I mean, you can do it with a colleague as well. Like you don't need to jump to AI. You could, just partner up with someone and be like, hey, what am I missing here? What questions would you have if, you were in the shoe, So there, a lot of different ways to go about that, but it does just take a mindset change that you have empathy for who you are communicating to.
So one of the things we're always suggesting to people who create and manage the content for a digital signage system is simplicity. Like really get it down to its bare bones. Make it bullet points. You just need a verb, really. You don't even necessarily need a subject most of the time because the subject is you, the person looking at the screen. So you don't even need to say you should do this. Just say do this. I don't mind if a digital sign tells me to just do it because it's a digital sign.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to translate that into headline messages. Add a QR code if you want the jumping off point for more information to shoot your audience over to an intranet or, a sign up form. So that's a great way to people feel like, oh, I've got all these other details, how can I put all that on a sign? We use the QR code all the time to jump off to more information. And it's just a great way to complement, to your point, the headline message, getting the attention, getting the core message out there. And then if people really want more, just pull up their phone and QR code them out to somewhere else. And then there's also a model that we can explore too, if we feel like you need more of a model. So we can jump into that as well. It's pretty straightforward. Think, feel, do. So I'll break that down. So think is pretty straightforward. Actually, the whole model is pretty straightforward, but it does help you just create that flow of content to get, like I said previously, your crappy first draft out. So think allows you to say, okay, what do you want your audience to know? Now, before you go into that, it's really helpful for you to edit yourself. What are the 1 to 2 things you want your audience to know? I know sometimes there might be more than that in your head. Generally speaking, try to edit yourself. You don't want to oversaturate that message, going off on 3 to 5 things. Just the simplicity of it. What 1 to 2 things do you want your audience to know is the first pillar of the model. The next one is feel. What 1 to 2 things, again, edit yourself, do you want your audience to feel? And I pause here with sharing this with teams that might be like, oh God, it's too touchy-feely. What do you mean I want them to feel? I don't want them to feel. So feel doesn't have to be touchy-feely. It doesn't have to be like, I feel, inspired. And I mean, in some cases, yes, hopefully we want to inspire. So that may not be the best example, but it can be straightforward. I want them to feel confident in how to do XYZ. I want them to feel informed. I know what choices I have and my benefits for next year. So don't get scared by the feel.
Right. I mean, it could be, if your whole thing is getting people to do what you're asking them to do, I want them to be motivated to go, yeah, I'm going to do that.
Exactly. So I just paused there on that one a little bit more because, again, sometimes, feel is maybe people think a bridge too far, but feel can mean many different things. Emotions are good. And then lastly, do. And this is, what do you want your audience to do, obviously. But this can be taking action on something, signing up for those benefits, or, going to that training, or getting something done, obviously. But it can also be awareness. The do can be, I want you to understand or be aware of our strategy, and then a longer burn on that and a follow-up communication would be like, I want you to understand our strategy and create objectives that help us achieve our strategy. So it can be awareness piece to start, and then follow-up communications could drive more action on the do. But do is also another one of those where it doesn't have to always be immediately, oh, yes, go XYZ. Do can be awareness. There's just a watch out with too much awareness. I just want them to know this. You have to, again, understand, well, why this time? Is it tied something closer to your action? So awareness, a little bit of a watch out there, in that you do want to make sure it ties to something that has the whiffum, what's in it for me. So it's fine to just make sure it, people understand, like, why are you telling me this right now?
So I know one of the things you focus on is what you call key messages. Obviously, sometimes if, manager 7 is sending something to the team saying, hey, no, seriously, Friday's the deadline. Where are we on this? It's pretty straightforward, but I think where a lot of this stuff gets lost is in something that's considered rather throwaway, I think, sometimes, which are more generalized communications. And you have a kind of an almost like a starter guide to how to actually put yourself in that mindset. Because I think a lot of times we think, oh, it's a general sort of, this is for everybody, or for a lot of people, or several departments, or a really big department, or whatever. And so because it's so broad, it must necessarily be shallow, because I don't have time to make it deep. But in fact, by following your steps, you can make it deep.
There is a guide that I created to help really everyone in our company understand how to approach, just some general messaging and to drive consistency. And you can use these across many channels. The one piece that again goes back to empathy is giving people the background, like, what are some of the context of typically it's a change, a lot of change in organizations. We've experienced a ton of change. So giving context as to, well, what's going on? Sometimes it's not a real big thing, but sometimes it does involve like, well, our industry is heading this way, so we have to go that way. That's, some of the factors. And I think leaders are sometimes, they're ahead of usually the general employee population in terms of knowing what the heck's going on, right? They're already down the journey of their change curve or whatever you want to call it. They have more access to decisions. Obviously, they're making the decisions, access to information. So giving a little background as to, what's the context that we're going into just helps people ground in understanding and I think just learn your business a little bit better too. So don't jump too far into just what's going on, what's happening. Like give some context to set it up a little bit. And then you do move into, well, what's happening? What does this mean for the company? What does it mean for our team? What does it mean for me? Now, we all know the what does it mean for me is usually the most important part. So you really have to think about those different layers sometimes and explaining what is happening and articulate as well, if it's a big change, what isn't changing. So for example, we're going to enter in this new market. We see a great opportunity. What it means for the company is XYZ. For you, you might need to learn more about that segment of what we're going after. But what isn't changing is our long-term vision. We are still here to do XYZ, so if you are introducing, something that's changing, you want to make sure you're grounding too and like what's not changing. Our vision's still this, our customers still that. That helps a little bit with setting things up and not making it feel too overwhelming in some cases. After the what is obviously the why. And a lot of times this does and should tie back to some of the background, some of the context of the factors that are at play. So what's the rationale for the change? Why are we doing this? Again, what are the benefits to me and the business? So why is sometimes breezed by because again, from your perspective, or if it's an executive, well, we know why, but you really need to root your message in that for the all employee, audience.
And I'll say, I think, I know I always say these kind of, I have this vision obviously in my head of managers are all, monsters. But this kind of old fashioned type of person who's like, the why is because I said so. But that just doesn't fly anymore.
Not at all. Nope. You really need to take time here. People will poke holes in rationales as they should. You're employing smart people and you want them to understand and go on, the quote unquote journey with you. But rationale is really important. If you can't make it make sense for people, they will fill in their own blanks.
Right. And it may be quite fantastical.
Yes. Oh, what they're really saying by us going into this other market is that we're closing down this whole side of our business. Like, no, people go to dark places a lot. You just really want to make sure you're filling that void. The why is important. Who is just like a no duh. But I think one thing to think about the who, obviously in more complex projects and communication in general, you're going to have teams impacted by either change or projects or launches in different ways. So you will, want to break out your audiences by different levels of impact and really spell out, well, what's this mean for you? So again, you're getting back to that, always the with them piece, but who does take a minute to step back and you do want to make sure like, oh, is this really applicable for all company at this time? Or do I need to let my managers know at this moment so they're informed to answer questions from their teams when they do find out?
Right. Or you're like, hey, software development really needs a lot of details on this, but maybe this other team, not yet.
Right. Yeah. So who starts to get you into communication planning in some senses? So you always have your comms partners there to help you through that. But I didn't want to breeze by that as like, well, yeah, who is who? Who is you pausing to say, okay, is this message really intended for all at this moment? So who does need to take who, the section, needs to take a few minutes to pause and make sure that this is really targeted correctly at the right time. And when is a branch off of that, who is targeted at the right time. When is obviously the timing of whatever's taking place. But there's also an element of like, okay, you're telling me we're entering a new market, going back to my example. So when's that happening?
How long is it going to take?
How long is it going to take? Is it next quarter? What is the fallout of the win? Are there teams that are going to have to then, shift what they're working on this quarter now? And so when takes again, a little more nuance versus just, at the first glance, when like, oh yeah, okay, it's tomorrow or it's next quarter. But take a minute to look at when in a way that might have more impact on your audience. Again, you're trying to think about what questions they're going to have.
Right. And answer them before they ask them.
Exactly. That helps everyone, right? It'll help your managers. It'll help you. So that's where when is a little multi-layered. And then branching off a when, what's next? What actions are needed? What do you want me to do with this information? Yeah.
Right. And what should I do first?
Yeah. And that goes a little bit back to the think, feel, do. What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? Is it sign up for this training now, or you'll find out more next month when we're going to take a deeper level into where this market's taking us? Or so what's next is just a nice placeholder. Again, anticipating people sitting there and getting this information like, what do you want? So take the time to think about that. Again, this will branch into comms planning a little bit because you probably mapped out some things that you do know are next. So that's really important to bake into this communication. Just a subhead under this, it's similar to Think, Feel, Do, where it can be informed, where you're just raising awareness, no action needed. Say that, like be really clear. Because sometimes people will just sit there, what do you want me to do? Or, there's a swirl moment, right? Like, why am I getting this?
Why did you repaint your office? I thought I had to. Nobody told you to do that.
Exactly. So that goes back to some of those stats earlier too. I think there's just swirl in general when communication comes out and what do you want me to do? Why is this happening? If it is just, raising awareness, we're letting you know this now, no action required, just read through and understand it, next month, blah, blah, blah. Or it's action. You will do this, you will do that. Not dictating like that, but, so those are kind of a, subhead of what would fall under what's next. The last one is how. This would go into a lot more planning and you may not have the answers today. But it's helpful for you to start thinking along this lines. If it is a bigger org change or like going after new business or any big change, you want to understand how you're supporting the team. How can people share questions with you or feedback? How can they voice concerns and let you know, hey, I don't know anything about this market. How are you training me? This is not in my current realm of understanding. So that piece could also, again, branch into comms planning, but it could mean like listening sessions, office hours, training, what resources. So the how is like, how are you getting people through this change? How are you guiding them to, so that could be involved with like guides or FAQs or, just variety of resources. If they do need to learn new ways of working or upskill in like a new area, how will they accomplish that? You, again, sometimes are just dropping this communication, which from, a leader executive perspective is like, so cool. It's great news. We're expanding in this new market. Someone's sitting there like, I don't know anything about that. Like, I'm feeling very uncertain. Like, we're going into Latin America. Do I need to learn Spanish? Like what's happening, like.
Right. The thing you don't want, especially with something large scale like that, you want to have answered so much stuff, or at least let them know, hey, if I don't have some of this information yet, I know that it's in your head and you're going to get it later. Because the last thing you want is, as a result of the email or communications you sent out, half your workforce just goes right to the bar and starts pounding down shots because now they're freaked out.
Yep. And that's where some of the rumor mill starts to kick in, and you get this swirl, is like, oh, they said we're expanding in this market, but I think what that really means is fill in the blank. I mean, some of that's inevitable, right? We're all human, we're built that way. But, the more you can have this upfront, it goes back to empathy, where you're putting yourself in their shoes and you're like, okay, we know this is a great thing. We've been studying this market for 2 years. We're so excited to kind of pull trigger and go after it now. They don't know all of that backstory. They don't know the journey and all of the great things that come with it. But, they're looking at it like, I've got to learn something new. I don't know this. This isn't in my job description, so you want to make sure you're thinking about how, and this again is especially with a bigger change, just in this context, how are you supporting people through change? And if you don't have all the answers, that's fine, but recognize that it's a change for people and you will be supporting them.
Right, exactly. I was going to say it's a great feeling for the organization. First they go, "Hey, there's going to be new stuff," and you go, "Ah!" And then the next thing, basically before you're done, the next thing you hear or read is, "And we got your back. Oh, you're going to have to learn Photoshop? Here's how you're going to do it. We're going to assign, you're going to do it every Friday from 2 o'clock on. This is going to be, of course, it's free because we need you to learn it. So don't freak out that you're never going to find the time to be able to do this. We're going to help you make sure that you have the time because we're the ones requiring it."
Yeah. Yeah. And, just your phrase, "we got your back," is awesome. Kind of like, we know this is a big change. We support you, just those empathetic messages. It doesn't have to be this, again, super flowery, over the top thing. It's just anticipating needs and saying, we know this is a change, even though we think it's a great thing. We know for you, it could mean different things. And we understand that, and we will support you. And you'll hear from us at this time. I mean, ideally, you already say we have a plan, but even if we don't, you are at least communicating that we know it is a change. The transparency piece comes in there. We know this is a change. We're currently working on plans to, help everyone through the change. It's okay if you don't have it all figured out, but it's better to say that it's a need and it's important to support the team through it. And we'll follow up in X amount of time, rather than just being like, isn't it awesome? It's going to be great. Like, and everybody's sitting there like, ugh.
Good luck. I'm going to throw you in the water now, and I hope you learn how to swim.
Exactly. Yeah. And everybody's in a different place on that change curve. And you just have to constantly remember that, again, with these bigger projects, that your excitement, your knowledge, you're way out here and like, I'm adopting all this, and other people, they're back here like really skeptical, or they're in denial, or,
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I think part of the reason that you overcome that just sort of knee-jerk skepticism is repetition. It's a truism of the way that human minds work, is that repetition makes it true. We know this is in everything. If you keep telling yourself you're a piece of garbage, then you kind of secretly think you're a piece of garbage. If you tell yourself you're a rock star, then you're kind of come across a little bit like a rock star. And we know this in all fields, sports, competitions, and things like this, especially acting, writing. People who rise to the top of an organization will always tell you it's all about your mindset, and you just put your mind to it. And so part of that, I think, is simply through repetition. And I'm not talking about, on your way to work, you're listening to affirmations. But it occurs to me that, again, I would naturally think this because, what we do, that's a great use of digital signage. Digital signage doesn't have to be necessarily the first time that someone's encountered the information. In fact, in many ways, it's better if it isn't, because a message isn't up very long. And so they have to go, I'm sorry, what? Whoa, hold on, what? Especially with those last things you were saying, the how stuff, and a little bit the what's next as well. When that stuff gets more buttoned down, you can use, we've already told you about this, but we're just reminding you, here's an element, maybe if there's a deadline coming up, use that digital signage to reinforce and just kind of repeat it over and over again so that they understand that they're in a a supportive environment, an environment in which, yes, we're aware of all of this. We know that you got a lot on your plate. You might actually forget something and you're not going to go, but which email was it? I can't remember. We've already anticipated this and we've broken out the things that we think are going to need repetition, and we've made digital signage messages out of them. Here they are.
Yep, that's great. The reinforcement in all channels, and especially the visibility of signage as people, are mulling around office, and it's a great opportunity. And I've seen too where some of these bigger change projects, sometimes get a light touch of internal branding. You might put a visual with something that each time you're talking about it. And that's how we've used it too, where we, would just pull over the visual from whatever project it might be. And that helps tie that message, or at least that announcement, to the associate. So they're kind of seeing that headline message, but then we do a little bit of branding around some of the projects, and it just is a nice, like, okay, I think I know what that was. I saw that on that presentation. It just brings it to life in a quicker way than, some of these more nitty-gritty messages that I've talked through.
So having bad communications in your organization, even a smaller organization, results in, well, people first off not knowing what the heck they're supposed to be doing or how they're supposed to do it. You waste time, you waste money, and you actually create barriers for people actually doing their jobs. And we have research that backs all this up. And we also have research that says that effective communications leads to better project outcomes, that projects are finished faster, that people are more engaged and more likely to actively participate in improving things. And all of that really just requires establishing some kind of a protocol system. And that begins in your head, you, the communicator. The model that we've been talking about today is simple: think, feel, and do. And it's all been elucidated by my guest today. She is Jennifer Razzano, Director of Internal Communications for 8451. Thank you very much for coming on, Jenny. Super interesting stuff. I don't know why, but I like internal communications a lot.
We're the unsung heroes, I think. But thank you, Derek. It was a great conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts.
Thank you very much. And again, everybody out there, I remind you that there is a transcript of the conversation we just had on the Vizix website. So go there and read it. For more free stuff, head to resources on Vizix.com for guides, videos, and more to help with your visual communications. Please subscribe and share, and contact us for information about our digital signage solutions.